Hello everyone and welcome to the Tradcast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. Today is episode number 7, and on today's show, I'm interviewing Mark Mace of Mace Family Traditions Archery, and we're going to be discussing some tips for properly tuning your traditional bows and arrows. This is going to be a very informative show. Let's jump right into it. All right, everyone, welcome to today's Tradcast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. Today is February 7th, and it's a very cold and snowy day here again in upstate New York. Truck thermometer saying 18 degrees, and I just wanted to give you guys a couple of updates before I get into this week's interview, where I recently talked to Mark Mace over at Mace Family Traditions Archery. Mark owns a traditional archery shop in Pennsylvania, does a great job, and I recently talked to him about some traditional bow and arrow tuning tips. So that was a great interview. I'm looking forward to getting that on here for you guys in a few moments, but I did want to start out the show today with just a few updates on a couple of things I've got going here in upstate New York. I wanted to start out by saying that we've gotten a lot of snow since the last podcast. We've got probably, I would say, close to 2 feet of snow since last week. And, it's January and February up here is always, it's always like this. It's always extremely cold and extremely snowy. The last week, most of the days have been like, single-digit highs or maybe low teens tops, but at nighttime it's been getting way down to like 10, 20 below zero. So it's just been really brutal. So, obviously that's kind of, limited what I've been able to do in the outdoors. As soon as spring comes around, I want to start doing some more in the field videos. But for the time being, with the winter being the way it is up here, I just can't get out into the outdoors as much. I haven't checked my trail cameras in the last couple of weeks, and there's really no need to, because I've actually taken a drive by a couple of my different places where I hunt, and usually there's a lot of traffic across the roads, and you can see it in the snow, but I don't think I've seen one track crossing the road in any of my spots in the last week and a half. So this snow and this cold has really got the deer shut down. They're into survival mode. They're tucked way back into the cedar swamps now, and that's pretty much going to be the case until probably the middle end part of March, when our snowpack should hopefully start going down. So I've been kind of limited in what I've been able to do in the outdoors. But as soon as spring rolls around, I'll be certainly doing some more things in the outdoors. But I also wanted to give you guys an update. I did get my Simmons Tiger Shark broadheads. Those came in the mail this week, and tell you what, I'm very impressed with those broadheads. They came packaged very well. They came in a very heavy-duty plastic case. There was some bubble wrap in there to protect the broadheads. I ordered 2 packages, so I got 6 Tiger Sharks, and I actually glued them on to my cedar shafts, my new Jerboden Archery cedar shafts. And I actually shot all of those arrows this week. And I think that's an important thing to do, especially with your traditional arrows, if you're going to be gluing them on, because you want to make sure that all those arrows and that those broadheads are glued on there correctly, and that you had them tuned on there good, and really mounted onto your arrows good, because you want to have good flight characteristics. So I glued on those arrows, and I did order some of the hot glue from Three Rivers Archery. I ordered some of that hot glue, but you know what? I ended up actually gluing those heads on with Gorilla Super Glue. So it seems to be working very well. Will they come off if I put them under heat? I don't know, but hopefully I won't have to find out. But I did glue those on with the Gorilla Super Glue, and I shot all those arrows with the broadheads, probably 4 or 5 times a piece, just to make sure that that those broadheads are going to fly exactly the way I want them to. And in my early testing of those broadheads, I mean, I've only been shooting them 10 yards in my basement, because that's where I'm stuck shooting right now. But so far, they seem to be flying very, very, very well. And I mounted them all. This is another thing that I think is key when you're mounting up your broadheads, is I've got the broadheads mounted onto the shafts in correlation with the fletchings the same exact way, or as close to the same exact way as I could on every single one. This way here, you know, I'm gonna get use, and I think it's a big key, and it's something I picked up on one of Jason Samkowiak's recent podcasts that he did, and it makes a lot of sense. And in my early testing with these broadheads, I can see where it is the case. You know, even though I'm focusing on that point, on the point I want to hit with my eyes, even though I'm not really looking at my bow or looking at my arrow when I shoot, you still see that broadhead there in your peripheral vision. So having that consistent visual with that broadhead, I think, is very key. So that's another reason why I wanted to mount them exactly the same way onto each shaft. So, and I've actually got mine mounted. I got my Tiger Sharks mounted where when I'm got the bow ready to shoot, that broadhead is actually running vertically. One of those bevels is vertical. That top bevel is vertical. So that's how I got mine mounted. They seem to be flying very well. I'll certainly be doing some more testing with those once our weather breaks and I can get into outside shooting a little more as we get closer to spring. Because like I said, I do plan on doing some turkey hunting with my longbow this spring, so I want to be shooting my broadheads as much as I possibly can in the meantime. So I wanted to give you guys a quick update on my Simmons Tiger Shark broadheads. I got those in the mail this week, and I really like them. I got the 135 grains, which I think are going to work very well for me. And I also wanted to give you guys an update. I don't think I've ever mentioned this before here on the podcast, but if anybody wants to, see more regularly updated content, whether it be trail cam photos or, some other videos, or just, updates in general from what our team is doing, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We do have Facebook and Twitter pages that we update, usually several times a day. So if you want to follow along with us in a more regular fashion, on Facebook, you can find us under Vantage Point Outdoors. Simply type in Vantage Point Outdoors up in the search bar on Facebook, and we should pop up as one of the top pages there. And on Twitter, you can find us at VPO Pros. So if anybody's interested in following along with us on a daily basis on social media, you can do it through those avenues. I don't think I've mentioned that here on the podcast yet, so I wanted to give you guys that update. But now I'm going to break over to the interview that I recently did with Mark Mace at Mace Family Traditions Archery, where we had a great discussion about some tips on tuning your traditional bows and arrows. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a special guest on the show tonight. We are interviewing Mark Mace, who is the owner of Mace Family Traditions Archery, and we're going to discuss tonight bow tuning and arrow tuning for your traditional setup. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you, Chad. It's an honor to be here with you.
Okay, well, like I told everybody in the intro, tonight I wanted to discuss some traditional bow and arrow tuning with you. I know that you own a family-run traditional archery shop down in Pennsylvania, correct?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Now, I wanted to start the show off by asking you a little bit about how you got into shooting traditional bows yourself, Mark.
Okay, Chad, basically, I grew up with this. My dad and my Uncle Hayward, every October, late September, they would get together. They were big, avid archery hunters in the family, and they would all congregate at our house, and throughout the summer and after the season was even over, they would always get together and they would fletch arrows, make them, burn the feathers with the old young burners, and make their strings and get all their gear together and everything. And as a small kid, I just got infatuated with it, and they showed me how to do it. And we started throwing a bunch of them together, and we'd go out in the yard. I remember my dad bought me, my first bow was a yellow fiberglass bear bow, and I believe it was 15 pounds. And we'd throw some bales of hay up in the backyard, and before season, as they got ready, we'd all get together and go out and fling some arrows at it. And just throughout the years, it progressed. As I got old enough and I graduated high school, then I went to work in a factory. Still did some bow hunting, still made some arrows and everything. And buddies of mine, they would always want some made up, so I made some arrows for them, some strings, and got together. And so finally one of them says, well, you know what, says, you do a pretty good job at this, that maybe you ought to think about opening up a business. And I always told him I don't know if I want to turn a hobby into a business. So pretty much I got into this at a very young age. It's a great way to meet people. Traditional archers are some of the best people I've ever met, and I just like it a lot.
Yeah, I can say for myself as well. I mean, I'm very new to traditional archery, and I'm really enjoying shooting my bows. Now, Mark, I also want to ask you a little bit about your bow shop. I know that you run a traditional bow shop down there in Pennsylvania. So could you just tell the listeners tonight a little bit about Mace Family Traditions Archery and exactly what the shop does?
Yeah, Chad. Basically, I started this, I opened the shop up in 2009, the fall of that. We've been in business going on, let's see, the 9th, 12, 13, 14. This will be our 6th year. It's not been an easy road, but it's not been bad either. It's been a lot of good times. What I do, my philosophy on how I take care of my customers is I treat them how I want to be treated. I don't try to push things just for a dollar sign on them. I try to help them find things that are going to complement their style of shooting, be it hunting, be it target, whatever. We carry a full line of traditional gear. I mean, just about anything that you need for traditional, we have it. We ship all over the continental United States. As far as the bows, we do carry used bows, and we carry the Jabodin bow line, and also we carry the medieval archery bow line. So as far as custom bows, those would be the two we have. I'm not a bowyer myself, so I do leave that to my buddies that do make the bows, Denny Mears and Scott McMullen. And if there's any of those that you're interested in, we do have some here at the shop that you can come down and shoot, or I can put you in touch with them specifically, and they can tell you more about what goes into it, what you would need, and whatever. But as far as anything else, we make custom arrows, we make economy arrows, wood, fiberglass, cedar, whatever. We do make Flemish bowstrings. We also sell the materials to do all this stuff. So anything that you would need, if you want to get into it, I would suggest that if you are a novice and you do need arrows and that, get somebody to make you your first dozen, get a couple strings. But as you get into it, you're going to find a lot more enjoyment by studying. Go to YouTube or whatever, or there's videos you can purchase. Learn these and make the stuff yourself. I mean, we have a motto here at Mace Family Traditions Archery, which my son and my daughter are in this with me. And our motto is, don't just learn the tricks of the trade, learn the trade. And I find that to be so true, and I find people that actually do get into that, they get so much more enjoyment out of the sport.
Yeah, I would say that that seems to be one of the major drawing cards to the traditional archery is the fact that it's so involved. You know, like you said, everything from the arrows to the bows, and how certain bowyers have their own techniques for making bows, and that brought me to another question that I wanted to ask you, Mark. When I first started getting into traditional archery, I was trying to make the decision whether or not I wanted to go with a recurve bow or a long bow for my first custom bow. And I heard from different forums and different videos that there's it was talking about the differences between a recurve and a long bow, and some advantages of each one. So I was wondering if you could touch a little bit, in your opinion, on some of the differences between recurves and long bows, and some of the advantages that each one might have and offer different shooters.
Okay, well, as far as my preferences, I used to specifically only shoot the recurves. For the simple fact, it seemed like they had a little bit more kinetic energy. They fit my style of hunting more. I was used to hunting out of a tree stand. Your basic recurve, hunting-wise, was anywhere from 58 inches down to 54 inches. So they were pretty maneuverable and whatnot. Now, the thing is, the long bows, they're longer, and I always used to think that they were actually too long to hunt out of a tree until I actually met people like Denny Mears, Scott McMullen, and a couple of the other bowyers that actually made them, and got a hold of a couple myself and played around with them, and actually they're just as capable and they're just as maneuverable. The only thing is, whenever you get into some recurves, and it all depends. I mean, there's so many of them out there. Everybody's familiar with the Bears. Pearson was a big one. York made a lot of bows. Wing Archery was another one. But the thing is, with a recurve, a lot of times you'll get what they call, it'll stack on you, to where you pull it so far, and then once you get back to either the 28 inches, or if you even have a little bit of a longer draw, that it'll seem like you can't pull it anymore, that it's just so hard. Whereas you get in with a long bow, to me personally, they don't seem like they do stack, and they seem like they have a lot smoother of a pull. Now, everybody has their own preferences, and like I said, this stuff that I'm telling you is just my personal opinion on it. I am by no means a guy that will say, I know everything about all this stuff, because I look at it this way. If you get to the point where you stop learning, then there's something wrong, because you learn stuff about archery every day. So as far as that end of it goes, like I said, a lot of it's your personal preference. A lot of guys like the Howard Hill bows. A lot of guys like some of the Barry bows, the Bear, the Byron Ferguson style. It's personal preference, more or less, than anything.
Right. Now, Mark, do you find one or the other to be more accurate, per se, than the other one?
To me, I find a recurve is easier to learn how to shoot than a longbow is. Just for the simple fact, for me, it seemed like the recurve had more of what they call a center shot, to where a lot of the long bows were not so much center. So your arrow, you had to cant the bow a little bit. But I personally believe it's in the shooter. I mean, anymore, I can shoot pretty much both of them. But for somebody that was just picking it up, I always had a lot easier time with the recurve.
Okay. Now, Mark, that gets me into the next main topic that I wanted to discuss with you here tonight, and that's about tuning your traditional bows and your arrows. When I first started getting into traditional shooting, I was checking out different forums and different online sources, and it seemed to be a common theme where everybody kind of talked about you had to tune your bows and tune your arrows to that bow in order to get the best performance out of that recurve, out of that longbow. So I wanted to start out this aspect of the conversation with, maybe you could touch on, in your opinions, what are some of the ways that a guy could wants to consider when he's thinking about tuning his bow.
Okay, well, as far as tuning, there's a couple different aspects you look at on it. One is your string and your brace height on your bow itself. A lot of manufacturers will specify what the brace height is, and if you're not familiar with the brace height, where your riser is on your bow, there's what they call the throat of it. And if you take a measurement from that to your actual string, it should be, a lot of them are like 7.5, 7 3/4 inches. I mean, it just all depends on what they specify the brace height should be. Each different bow year, they'll tell you what the brace height should be whenever they made the bow. The thing is, your bow will have what they call an AMO on it, and that is the length of your bow. And as a general rule, on a recurve, your string should be 4 inches less than the AMO. On a long bow, it's anywhere from 3 to 2 inches. So, and the thing is, as you tune these things and you put your new string on, I mean, any new string that you get, a lot of the materials now, they say they don't stretch as much. They will stretch a little bit, but the thing is, I do know with the B50s and that, usually what we do, we'll make a string up, throw it on the bow, we'll let it sit overnight because it'll relax, and then you put twist in the string. And what that does, that affects your brace height. So if your bow says the brace height should be 7 3/4 inches, then that's from the throat of that grip to your string itself. Now, once you get that on there and you put it in, then you have your knocking point. What we like to do is tie one on first, because what that does, it allows us to move either up or down, so we can get what, just like in baseball, you want to get the sweet spot to where that bow will shoot just right. So that way we can move the knocking point around. Now, as far as the arrows, what we do is you take 4 or 5 fletched arrows that you're planning on shooting, and you shoot those at the target. And once you get that group there, and then you take 3 to 4 bear shafts. And a lot of people don't think that a bear shaft will fly, but within 20, 25 yards or whatever, they're pretty accurate. So what you do is you put those on, you get the same weight as what your other arrows are, and you take your bear shafts and you shoot those. Now, if your bear shafts are hitting to the left, if you're a right-handed shooter, to the left of your fletched arrows, then your spine is stiff. So, I mean, there's a couple things you can do with that. You can, one, you can add, if you're shooting 100 grain points, you may want to put 125 grain on. You may want to look at your, going to a lighter spine on those shafts a little bit. There's just a couple of variations you do with those. If you're shooting them and they're hitting to the right of your fletched arrows, then you have a weak spine. So it all depends on what length you're using these things at. If you're a 28-inch draw and you're shooting a 32-inch shaft, you can cut the shaft down to about 29, and that will stiffen it up some. So there's a couple of things that you can do as far as right to left. Now, if your shafts are hitting high, then what you're doing is actually your knocking point is too low on it. So you would have to move that up a little bit. And usually what we end up starting with is we take a bow square and put it on, and what we'll do is go 1/8 of an inch above center, the 0. And that's where we'll start putting our knocking point to shoot. So if you're shooting high, your knocking point's low, you want to raise it up a little bit. If you're shooting low, then your knocking point is too high. So those are just a few things you can do, and then once you get into the hunting broadheads and that, then you tune those to it, and there's various ways you can do that. Sometimes you can just turn the blades up. It depends on if you're using two blade, 4 blade, and whatnot. But those are just some of the things you can do. But basically what you want to do is get this set to where your flexed arrows and your bare shafts are hitting at the same place.
Right. Now that actually brings up a question for me, Mark, that I wanted to ask you. I heard on a forum a while back, I heard a guy saying that for somebody who's new to traditional archery, that pretty much what he was saying was until you get really good in your shot form, that he actually recommended not trying to bare shaft tune your arrows to your bow until you were really comfortable in your shooting form, and pretty sure that you weren't messing things up that way, before you went ahead and tried any bare shaft tuning. Is that something that you would recommend, or do you? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
On that, and personally, it stands to reason. Some, it all depends on how really critical you are of it. And if you're just getting into it and you don't really have your true form down to where you're getting good clean releases, your form and everything is the way it should be, and there's got to be room for improvement, then that would stand to make a lot of reason. But if you come into this and you're really critical and you want to match everything, specifically your bow, your arrows, your broadheads, you want the maximum and the precise precision out of that equipment, then I suggest that you do the bare shaft tuning and whatnot.
Okay, now another follow-up question that I had for you, Mark, on this topic is, in your opinion, is there any rule of thumb guidelines where, say for example a guy is drawn 50 pounds. Is there any rule of thumb guidelines where if you're drawn 50 pounds at say 27 inches, ideally you would want to look for a broadhead or a field point in the, just say for example, the 135 grain range? Is there any rule of thumbs for, draw weights to broadheads that in your opinion?
Well, usually, from my personal experience, plus from the business aspect of what I come across, the most common grain field point is 125 grain if you're using cedars or whatever. That's pretty much a common thing that everybody seems like they want to shoot. As far as broadheads, I personally shoot 125 grains. Most of them will be between 100 and 135, but it all depends on your game too. A lot of guys, they like a lot heavier ones. Some, they'll even come in and say, I want 165 grain. I'm going moose hunting or elk hunting or whatever. A lot of the stuff is you have to fit your gear, what you're hunting or what you're doing with it. It's pretty much you wouldn't go hunting a bear with a switch. So, but like I said, as a general rule, most people that I come across and my own personal shooting, a rule of thumb is most everybody uses 125 grain as far as the field points. And then, like I said, you get into the hunting broadheads, anywhere from 100, 135 is your most common one that you're going to find.
Okay. Now, Mark, I earlier tonight before this interview, I actually posed a question on one of the traditional bow hunters groups on the Facebook page, and I let everybody know that I was going to be interviewing you tonight for the show, and I asked if anybody had any specific questions that they'd want to ask you, and I had a couple of replies, and Bob Vetter, he wanted to know, for a guy that's got a short draw length, I think he told me he's drawn like 25 or 26 inches, but for a guy that's got a relatively short draw length and going to be shooting a traditional bow, in your opinion, he wants to know what's the best way to deal with that as far as a peak performance standpoint.
Okay, well, as far as your draw, the way I would handle a shorter draw, like I said, if you're getting a 50-pound bow at 28 inches and you only have a 26-inch draw, the general rule of thumb is it's 2 to 3 pounds per inch. So actually, Bob wouldn't be drawing a 50-pound bow if it was set up for a 28. If he's only got like a 26-inch, he would actually be drawing like a 46 or 45. It just all depended on who the bowyer was, what they were. But like I said, I mean, you take a general 2 to 3 pound per inch on your draw length. So, I mean, if you had somebody that actually had a 29-inch draw length and had a 50-pound bow, then he'd be pulling more of a 53. So, I mean, that has a lot to deal with it. Now, as far as your maximum performance out of it, something like that, like I said, I mean, you want to get a matched set of arrows that will fit that. You may decide, instead of buying, if you want to pull 50 pounds, you may want to buy like a 54 or 55-pound bow if you're only at a 26-inch draw. I mean, that's something specifically that they're going to have to deal with. But like I said, a lot of bows are marked a certain poundage, but they're not necessarily that. So anytime you go to purchase one and you want to make sure it's an exact poundage you need for your draw length, either have the bowyer or the shop put it on a bow scale. And that way they can tell you pretty much what it is, how many pounds it is at that particular draw. Now, as far as you want a long bow or a recurve, like I said, that's just personal preference.
Right. I can understand where you're coming from on that there, Mark. I also had a separate question come in from another guy that is on the forum, and Franklin Jones. He had a question he wanted to ask you, and his question is, where do you see traditional archery going in the future as far as growth?
Growth-wise, from a business standpoint, I see it increasing. And just from the places that I have been to, the shoots that I've gone to, it seems like more and more the compound shooters are either splitting their time up and shooting traditional gear as well as their compounds, or they're giving up the compound bows altogether, and they're falling in love with the mystique of the recurve and how it's portrayed, and just the mystery of it. I mean, let's face it. I mean, I don't put people down, whoever shoots whatever. At one time, I was like a lot of them. I mean, whenever the compounds came out, I had to see what it was all about. But the thing is, I mean, you look at the true thing of the traditional bow. I mean, it's basically whatever material that you're using to make that particular weapon out of, the string, the arrows, whatever you want to use. But the big thing is it comes down to your ability. I mean, I've never shot with sights. I've always shot instinctively. What people want to do with that, that's totally up to them. But it's the whole ambiance that now you can walk back in time. And Fred Bears, the Howard Hills, and whoever else. I mean, an old gentleman told me at one time, he says, you know what, Mark? He says, there's 3 different types of phases a hunter goes through. And he said, the first one is you got to kill everything. He says, whenever you first get into it, you want to kill as many as you can. He says, in your next phase, as you get older, you want to kill the biggest. He said, and then whenever you finally hit maturity, he says, it don't matter if you kill anything or not. You just like being out in the woods. And I think a lot of people, being that it's not like shooting compounds and that, I mean, you can put the thing away now, get it out next year, as long as your sights and everything are still on, and boom, you can go out there and just nail it. But with a recurve, you got to train your muscles, you got to train your eyes again. It's just a whole new thing. And to me, it's just a lot more fun. It's a lot more natural. And I hope that that comes out all right or whatever.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Mark. I mean, I'm new to traditional archery, and I've only been shooting about 3 months now, and I'm still struggling. Honestly, even at just 10 yards, I've actually got a little makeshift range in my basement set up where I've been shooting every night. But I've been shooting for 3 months, and I'm still struggling to get really consistent. Whereas, like I said, if I had my compound, I literally could be dialed in at that 10-yard range in a matter of minutes. So there certainly is a lot more. I would certainly say that there's a lot more effort and a lot more patience and just persistence that has to be put into the traditional game in order to get that consistently good shooting. But I think it all boils down to how much effort an individual wants to put into it. And I mean, if you look at some of these great shots that are out there with the traditional gear, it certainly is hard to dispute their results with the traditional equipment. But before I let you go, I wanted to have you just ask you one final question, and that was, if for all the guys out there listening and guys and gals out there listening, if you could give one tip to a new traditional archer, what would that tip be?
If it was me and you're just getting into this, my tip would be practice and don't get discouraged. I mean, a lot of people think that you need to go out and shoot 50 to 100 arrows a night. I don't buy that. If you go out and shoot 10 to 15 a night and go out into the woods and do what we call stump shoot, where you can just take some old arrows that you don't mind busting or whatever. Don't sit there and get your tape measure and measure off, well, this is 50 yards and this is 75 yards. Go into the woods, find some old soft stumps or whatever, and try to guess the distance on your own. Get to the point where you can walk through the woods and you can tell yourself, well, that's 30 yards, or this is 15 yards. And just shoot at it and just get comfortable with your equipment. And if you do those few things, I think it'll make you a better and a much more successful archer.
Well said, Mark. That's actually one thing that I certainly want to do this year, and one of the core reasons why I'm making the switch over to traditional archery is, I don't want to be reliant on that rangefinder. I want to get to the point where, like I said, I can be out there in the woods in the native environment and just see the target that I want to shoot and just get to where you can just do that fully instinctively. And I know it's going to be a long learning curve to get to that level. But again, I think it just all comes down to how much effort and how much energy and willpower that you're willing to put into it. But I want to thank you for being on the show tonight, Mark. Now, for the people out there listening, where could they go to learn more about Mace Family Traditions Archery?
Okay, you can either like us on Facebook, or we have a website, which is macefamilytraditionsarchery.net. Like I said, we're just a family, small little shop there. But our big thing is we try to treat our customers as though how we'd want to be treated. even if you don't purchase anything from us or whatever, if you have a question, if we can help you out, we'll be more than happy to. If you want to give us a call or whatever and just shoot the breeze and pick the brain or whatever, that's not a problem either. But the main thing is just get involved with it, because I'll guarantee you once you do, you're not going to regret it. And Chad, to you, buddy, welcome to the Brotherhood. And I really appreciate you having me on the show there. And if you have any other questions at the time, feel free to give me a call.
Well, thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Yeah, I sure will. It was a great time talking to you tonight. I'm sure all the listeners out there, certainly can take a thing or two from this conversation, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
All right, buddy.
Okay, take care.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
All right, guys. Well, there you have it. Just a look back at my recent interview I did with Mark Mace over at Mace Family Traditions Archery. If anybody wants to get some more information about Mace Family Traditions Archery, you can visit their website. I'm going to leave a link down in the narrative of this video, so check out their website. And as always, I want to thank everybody who tuned into this week's show. I will see you next week and right here on an all-new episode of the Tradcast.